Part 153. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1521. Teaching in Kongwengan is different from teaching 3 children in private. There are at least 10 students sitting there, and one of them is the crown prince of the country. He can't just teach the prince 4, 5, or 6 chapters, right? In other words, when he taught 3 children the book of filial piety, the 2nd and 3rd chapters were all rough, and he did not explain much about the filial piety of the emperor and the princes, but more about the later chapters. Zhuangsun had a big head. For the first time, he felt that teaching a class was not so easy. Especially, this prince was not an ordinary prince, and his father was not an ordinary prince. What should I do? When teaching the emperor chapter, you can't always say to the prince, no Nian Erzu, Yushi Ujuda. What did their ancestors of the Li family have to learn and commemorate on the way of loyalty and filial piety? The emperor's throne came from rebellion, and the current throne is not so right. It really makes him miss his ancestors and cultivate his own virtue with the virtues of his ancestors. Zhuangsun felt a headache just thinking about it. So you can't teach like that. Zhuangsun was in a daze when he looked at the book of filial piety on the case, so Confucianism designated the king as an emperor. He was very difficult to teach children. The miscellaneous books that Manbao brought back were right. If the king is a commoner, then there are many people in this world. Things can be explained clearly. Zhuangsun thought about it unconsciously, and when he realized what he was thinking, he was shocked, and then shook his head repeatedly to remove the distracting thoughts in his heart. But thinking can never be restricted by the body. He clearly told himself not to think, but he still couldn't help but continue to think. If the ruler is designated as the people, and the ruler is loyal to the people, then everything in this world can be explained, but this is also very dangerous. He is not sure what the emperor and the prince will think. If the courtiers and the scholars in the world think not of being loyal to the king, but to the people, is this dynasty still the dynasty of his Li family? If they don't agree with this view, can the head on his neck be preserved? Zhuangsun began to calculate the probability that he would be able to leave the palace alive if he taught the prince unreservedly like he taught 3 children. In the end, he sighed quietly and decided to wait and see the changes. Before that, he should be mediocre first. Maybe, he can ignore the filial piety of the emperor and the princes, and start with the filial piety of the common people? Thinking of this, Zhuangsun suddenly became enlightened. That's right, let's start with the filial piety of the common people. Zhuangsun exhaled after thinking about it, and then put away the book on the case, got up and looked out, and found that the sky had darkened at some point. Zhuangsun was shocked and went out quickly. He saw 3 disciples sitting on the steps of the yard eating melons and fruits. Hearing the footsteps, they turned their heads and looked back. Mr. Zhuang asked, "What time is it? What are you doing here?" The 3 of them got up immediately, and Manbao said, "Sir, we have all eaten dinner. We came here and saw that you were in a daze, so we sat here and waited for you." Bai Shan picked up the plate. "Sir, would you like to have a piece?" Mr. Zhuang was silent for a moment and said, "Why didn't you call me? You want to leave the palace because of your teacher." He lived outside the palace and went to work in the palace every day, except when he was on duty. Bai Shan said indifferently, "It's still early, the palace gate has not been locked yet, don't worry, you're just thinking about something, so we won't disturb you." Bai Erlang complained, "I was going to call you, but both of them said that when people are thinking about things, they hate being disturbed the most, so they won't let me call you." "Sir, if I call you, you hate it?" "Me?" Zhuangsun looked at the bright-eyed 3 people and knew that they had bet on him. He blew his beard angrily and said, "I don't hate it." Zhou Man and Bai Shan's eyes widened in surprise. Bai Erlang looked at the 2 of them triumphantly. The 2 days of the bookstore were on duty, ha 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 ha. Mr. Zhuang didn't eat their melons and fruits, and left the palace with his sleeves thrown. The three watched the back of Mr. disappear. Bai Shan and Man Bao both sighed faintly. Bai Erlang said happily, "Tomorrow happens to be my duty library, who are you coming?" Bai Shan said, "I have plenty of time, I can do it any time." He looked at Man Bao. Man Bao sighed, "I'll come, you give me the book list." The weather has been sunny recently, and the bookstore is on duty to take out the books to dry, and then take them back in the afternoon and put them back in order. Because there are not many literate people in the palace, and books are precious, such work naturally cannot be left to the servants. In the past, when there was only one student in the Chongquen Museum, these things were done by the lecturers and editors of the East Palace. Now there are 29 more students in the Chongquen Museum. Of course they did this. However, in order not to make mistakes and less damage to the books are dried in batches. 3 people are on duty every day, and 29 people take turns to dry them. Tomorrow will be Bai Erlang and Feng Zonping Ziang. Early the next morning, Man Bao read a text in the yard, stretched his arms and legs, and went to the library. The waiters had already moved out the drying tables, and there were only 2 passages left in the yard, and the others were densely placed on tables. When Xiao Yuan Zheng and Lu Tai Zheng Tai came from the Tai hospital, they happened to see Man Bao coming out of the library on the east side with books in his arms. He held 7 or 8 books in his arms, and put them on the table and began to spread them out to dry. Xiao Yuan Zheng couldn't help but stop in surprise. "Lord Zhou Xiao, why do you need to come in person to dry the books? After all, it is also a 5th rank official. There are not many people in this Chongquen Museum who are of a higher rank than her." Feng Zonping and Yi Ziangle, who also brought out the book, said with a deep expression, "Xiao Yuan Zheng, I like to do something when I think about it." Feng Zonping and Yi Ziang were even happier, and laughed outright. Xiao Yuan was looking at them suspiciously. The 2 met Man Bao's eyes, and immediately closed their mouths, indicating that they would not say anything. They turned and ran into the library to continue carrying books. When the 3 of them moved out the books on the list to dry, it was almost time. Feng Zonping and Yi Ziang went to class, while Man Bao continued to fix her books. Today, Mr. Zhuang took the class for the first time. He first talked about the first chapter of the first chapter, and then jumped directly to the 6th chapter on the filial piety of the common people. The Crown Prince was a little bored sitting down, but after listening to it, he gradually fell in love with it, because Mr. Zhuang likes fables in his lectures, and listening to his lectures is like listening to stories, and it is not very boring. Of course, the most important thing is that the filial piety of the common people is rarely related to the prince. It is not difficult for him to support his parents with food and clothing. He did not hear Mr. Zhuang suggesting that he should be filial to the emperor. The content of the class has nothing to do with him at all. The prince listened with relish. The same content, Bai Shan and Bai Erlang also listened with relish, because the story of Mr. S. fable has changed. See you at 4 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1522. At the end of the class, Mr. Zhuang smiled and said, "Although it is the filial piety of the common people, you may not lack food and clothing to support your parents, but you have the same filial piety. If you can support your parents, even if the gold and silver you spend are not what you earn, I think they will be very happy. So, next time you take a rest, when you go back, give your parents or grandparents something, or a set of clothes, or a bowl of rice." Seeing that everyone responded respectfully on the surface, Mr. Zhuang smiled slightly, "I will ask." Crowd. For the first time, the students were a little distressed when they met the teacher who pressed him to give gifts to their parents. The prince couldn't feel their distress because he didn't think it had anything to do with him, but he was late in the afternoon to deal with government affairs in the Taiji temple, and when he had to stay for dinner with his parents, The prince was enjoying the meal and raised his head. Seeing that the mother on the side seemed to have a bad appetite, she took a chopstick of green vegetables from the plate in front of her. Is it a bitter summer for the mother? The queen was stunned for a moment, then smiled. Yeah, it's getting hotter and hotter today, so I have a bad appetite these 2 days. The emperor couldn't help looking at her with concern, knowing that she didn't like to hire a doctor, so after thinking about it, he said to the prince, "Let Joe Man come to the Taiji palace for a walk, and see if there is any way to cool down." The emperor said, "It's only May, and you're already suffering from summer. What will you do next month?" The queen did not refute this time, seeing that he only eats meat and not vegetables. She smiled and said, "Don't tell me, Your Majesty, you have been sweating a lot these past 2 days. The imperial doctor said that you should eat less meat. Eat more vegetables and fruits." The emperor bowed his head to eat without saying a word. The queen turned to look at the prince and gave him a wink. The prince was stunned, looked at the vegetables that were very close to him, and then saw that there was a lot of meat in front of the father. After thinking about it, he also gave him a chopstick of vegetables. The father eats more vegetables. After he felt that it was not enough, the prince also motioned for Eunuchwu to bring all the vegetables in front of him to the emperor. Eunuchwu was trembling, and hesitantly moved forward. Looking at the pointed green vegetables in the bowl, the emperor couldn't help blowing his beard, but he looked up at the queen, then looked at the prince again, and then silently raised his chopsticks to eat. Forget it, after all, it was held by the prince. Speaking of which, among the children, only the third child and Mingda would put food in his mouth. This was the first time the prince had served him vegetables. It's a pity that this dish is not my favorite. Although huangzai has been discounted by half, it is still huangzai, isn't it? When Eunuchwu saw that the emperor was eating vegetables, he immediately picked up a plate of green vegetables and placed it in front of the emperor. The emperor glanced at his son who was eating chicken legs, and ordered a plate of green vegetables from a distance. "Pick it up for the prince, the weather is hot, eat more vegetables and less meat." The queen sat on the side with a smile and watched their father and son hurt each other, and his appetite became better. The appetites of the two sons are similar to their father's. They only like to eat meat and drink, but do not like to eat green vegetables. The same is true of Mingda's child, who is obviously too weak to eat more meat, and is always greedy for meat. The prince had enough to eat and drink, and he worked overtime with the emperor again. It was completely dark, and the gates of the palaces had to be locked before he finished approving the book that was distributed to him. After handing it over to his father, he would pat his butt and leave. Thinking of what Zhuangsun said today, children do the work on behalf of their parents, and the concubine still has to share the benefits of the land, use his body prudently, and filial piety to his parents. There is no need to do it for him. Let's not talk about whether he is willing or not. He really asked to do it for him. His father might think that he wants to grab the throne and become the emperor. So the crown prince tried his best to be sincere and said a little nonsense. "My son will retire first, and the royal father will rest earlier, so don't stay up late and hurt yourself." The emperor nodded and let him go, adhering to the rules of etiquette, and told Wu Gong to be fair, "Light 2 more lanterns, be careful with your feet." Wu Gong responded respectfully, and the people in the palace brightened the lanterns for the prince to show the way. When the prince left, the emperor turned his head and asked Guzhong, "The prince didn't lose his temper with the courtiers today?" Guzhong thought about it and then bent down and said, "His Royal Highness is in a good mood today, and he didn't lose his temper." The emperor was rather inexplicable. "I actually know that I care about me, what's the matter?" Guzhong felt that the emperor suspected that the Prince Weasel was giving New Year's greetings to the chicken, and immediately said, "I heard that the prince went to the Chongguan Museum this morning to read the Book of Filial Piety." The emperor was very surprised. Confucius served on the wine? What's so strange about him on the Book of Filial Piety? I remember that he often taught the book of filial piety to the prince a few years ago, and I didn't see the prince listen to it much, but he did not miss it. I don't give a shit. Gu Zhong smiled and said, it was a servant named Zhuang Xun. His Majesty just sealed him as an official of the 9th grade servant and let him go to the East Palace to give lectures. When the emperor heard this, he reacted, Zhou Man and Bai Shan's teacher. Yes. The emperor put down his pen, felt his beard and thought, not to mention Zhou Man and Bai Shan, they are both pure filial piety people. Does their junior brother, Bai, or something, also honor their parents? Where did Gu Zhong know? However, he still bent over and said with a smile, that Bai Gongzi can not only enter the Imperial College, but also enter the Chongguan Museum. Naturally, he is a filial person. The emperor thought about it, and after a while, he said, Second Kong is good at everything, even if he talks about the book of filial piety, he can't compare with people, and his temper is also violent. Gu Zhong. Who is the one who scolds the prince for his dog temper every time he doesn't listen to the teacher's lectures? Now I know that the prince has a temper like yours. Gu Zhong responded with a stiff smile, his eyes swept across the hall, and he found that only his apprentice and 2 palace maids were there, so he was relieved. Well, it's a good seal, the words just now shouldn't get out. It was true that these words were not spread, but yesterday the prince not only had a friendly dinner with the emperor, but the emperor also cared about the lighting problem of the prince walking at night, but it was spread. The whole dynasty and the whole palace know it. Everyone knows that the relationship between the prince and the emperor is more harmonious, and before the prince realizes it, he acts more smoothly in the court. Even Weiji, who had been picking noses and eyes at him, rarely smiled at him, and even gossiped with him when he was resting. His Royal Highness dealt with a good deal from Shengzhou today. The prince nodded reservedly, and couldn't help but feel joy in his heart. Even his father rarely gets praise from Weiji. After hearing this, Lord Tang smiled and said, the weather has been hot recently, and the Queen's phoenix is in poor health. Why doesn't your highness suggest that the Queen should go to Daming Palace to escape the summer heat? The Queen is gone, don't you take the opportunity to propose that the Emperor go with him? This is also filial piety. Once and for all, the relationship between father and son will naturally improve. Old Master Tang, who has always had a good father-son relationship, has a deep understanding of this. See you at 8 p.m. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1523. The prince and the emperor are a little bit sullen, but they are really filial to the queen. Today, he has let Zhou Man take time to visit the queen at the Taiji Hall. When I went to see the empress during the afternoon break, seeing that her complexion had not changed much, I remembered what old Master Tang said, so I said, why don't the empress move to Daming Palace to escape the summer? It is closer to Longshao Mountain, and it is by the Weha River, so it is cooler in summer. However, the Daming Palace is now suspended, and many places have not been built, so only the Hanyuan Palace can live. The queen hesitated, your grandmother is not feeling well these days. The prince said, then let the imperial grandmother go too. After thinking for a while, he said, let the father and the emperor persuade the emperor's grandmother, doesn't he feel very hot recently, just move in together. The queen thought for a while and thought this was a good idea, so she asked with a smile, if that's the case, let your daughter-in-law move in as well. Seeing that it's going to be June, the weather is getting hotter and hotter, and it's hard for her to be pregnant. The prince did not object. So the prince was filial, and the matter of letting the empress move to Daming Palace to escape the summer was settled. Of course, the empress was also filial, so the empress dowager was also brought there. The royal family is friendly, they are happy, and the life of the courtiers is also easier. Although some people are very anxious, but old officials like Wei Ji don't care. The prince is developing in a good direction, and the relationship between the emperor and the prince is also improving. They will be anxious with those people when their brains are exhausted. The Daming Palace is just northeast of the East Palace, and has already left the North City. The emperor moved as soon as he said it. Jizi and the ministers on duty went directly to the Hanyuan Hall to listen to the announcement, but they suffered a lot. When I asked the crown princess for the pulse before, she walked from Chongguan Pavilion to the West Palace with short legs, not far at all. But now she has to go to Daming Palace. Not to mention, she has to leave the palace first before she can go to Daming Palace. Even if there is a carriage on the way out of the palace, it is still far away. In this way, the time for her to rest and the time to teach her disciples in the afternoon are directly compressed. Fortunately, Zhenggu and the others have pierced all the people in the palace recently, and collected a lot of pulse cases. Moreover, because of the repeated piercing techniques, now even if Man Bao is not staring at them, those types of stitches can be pierced. She can relax now, otherwise she will have to run and break her leg. The queen probably knew that she was difficult, and after she ran for 2 days, she smiled and said, "Come over from 11 Niiwen in the future, it will be faster that way." Man Bao was taken aback and asked, "Can 11 Niiwen pass through Daming Palace? Isn't there a river in the middle?" The queen smiled and said, "There are boats on the river, and you can come here by boat." Man Bao was so surprised that he deliberately went to 11 Niiwen early the next day with the queen's warrant. The guards and servants on duty on the water looked at the warrant in Man Bao's hand, looked up at the sun again, and couldn't help but say, "Dr. Zhou, don't you usually go to see the crown princess after lunch? It's just right today. It seems to be a little early." Man Bao's face was slightly red, and he insisted, "Chongguan Museum is not busy today, so I will come earlier. How about it, can I go by boat?" "Yes, yes, but we have to wait for the delivery from the Shangfood Bureau before leaving. The number of times this ship travels every day is counted, and we can't go less or more. 11 Niiwen is not far from Daming Palace. The north side of them is Longshaoiwen, there is no palace wall or city wall, and the south is the East Palace, but it is not connected to the palace wall of Daming Palace, so there is a hole. That opening is the river. The water comes up from Longshaoiwen, flows through the west inner garden, and then divides into 2 parts, one flows to the palace city, and the other flows to the Daming Palace. The wall goes to the inner city. It can be said that these 2 waters run through the capital, so the water source is very important, and there are forbidden troops patrolling along the way. The Empress lived in Daming Palace, and some food was delivered directly there, but there were still many things that had to be advanced to the palace before being transferred to Daming Palace. So this river is open to send things over there. Because Man Bao arrived early, the boat that usually set off at noon set off after receiving the things sent by the Shangfood Bureau. Sitting on the boat, Man Bao couldn't do it with excitement. Looking at the clear water, she took the boat out of the west inner garden, and after a while, she arrived under the palace wall of Daming Palace and went directly by boat. There is a small pier inside the wall, and the pier is also guarded by the Imperial Army. Man Baodu has to disembark before he can enjoy the scenery on the river. She was quite sorry. Chang Yu and Mingda, who were playing at the Crown Princess, heard Man Bao's sigh of regret and couldn't help laughing. Chang Yu said, "If you want to see the water scenery, let's call a boat and go to the lake to play. Why do you need Tate to go to the river to watch?" Mingda smiled and nodded, and said, "That section of the river is not long, and flowers and grass are not allowed in the water. What's so beautiful? The lake is better. Now there are lotus buds in the lake, just right." Having said that, everyone wanted to go to the lake to play, but even the crown princess couldn't help but move. "I suddenly want to eat lotus seeds." Princess Changjio, sister-in-law, Your taste is really weird. You just said you wanted to eat garlic, but now you have replaced it with lotus seeds. The princess touched her stomach and smiled, this is not what I want to eat, it is what the child in my stomach wants to eat. Chang Yu looked at the belly of the crown princess, and for some unknown reason, she suddenly shivered. She whispered to Man Bao, is this belly going to go down? Of course, this is where it is, Man Bao said, at least it has to be twice as big. Man Bao did not know how many pregnant women she had seen since she was a child, not to mention the pregnant women she had seen in the medical center, but just a few sister-in-laws in the village and her own family. She had seen their pregnant belly getting bigger every day. She said, wait, in the next 2 months, your stomach will grow like a blow. By the way, you can change the recipe. The child has entered another stage, and the nutrients required have also changed, so the diet has to be changed. The crown princess nodded and said with a smile, I had a bad appetite when I was in the East Palace. Fortunately, I moved here. It's much cooler and my appetite has improved. Like the crown princess, there are also queens and emperors who have a good appetite. It was so good that the emperor ate 6 melons in one go, and successfully broke his stomach. Manbao and Mingda were invited by Gu Zhong himself halfway through the game. Mingda and Chang Yu were worried, so they went with Manbao. On the way to go, Gu Zhong euphemistically and Manbao expressed the emperor's meaning, it is best not to write a medical case about eating too much melon. Because the written medical case has to be handed over to the Taiyuan hospital, and when it is handed over to the Taiyuan hospital, the ministers in the court will all know, not to mention the emperor, even Gu Zhong can think of how Wei Ji will advise tomorrow. Therefore, I also ask Man Bao to help conceal 1 or 2 things. We will see a doctor quietly, and quietly prescribe medicine and drink medicine to cure it. See you tomorrow. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1524. It is impossible to do it quietly, and the medical case must be written. Otherwise, if something happens to the emperor, will it be her or Gu Zhong's? However, in front of Gu Zhong's face, Man Bao didn't say it, neither refused nor agreed. This is a skill he learned from Xiao Yuan Zheng. When the superiors have bad requirements, they just fool around like this, and then they can do whatever they want. It's always right to follow the rules. Especially this kind of consequences that are not very serious, it has to follow the rules. Otherwise, because you didn't follow the rules, what should I do if the consequences that were not very serious became serious? Unless it is a serious consequence such as poisoning, the superiors have ordered that it is not allowed to spread, and the imperial physicians will quietly write secret medical cases, which will not be included in the register for the time being. But when the dust settles, those who should be included in the book will still be included in the book. When he arrived at the palace where the emperor lived, the emperor was leaning on the couch with his head covered, his hands still on his stomach, and his face was a little pale. The queen sat aside with a worried expression on her face. Seeing Man Bao, her face relaxed and she waved quickly, Dr. Zhou Xiao, come and show your majesty. Man Bao opened the medicine box and took out a pulse pillow to ask for a pulse. Gu Zhong is a very caring servant, so on the way he gave an overview of the emperor's symptoms, including what he ate for lunch today, and melons shortly after lunch. He ate a few in total, saying, it has to be clear and clear. So Man Bao was very clever and didn't ask any more embarrassing questions to the emperor. She felt the pulse and said, it's cold, does your majesty hurt? Melon is cold, so it is not advisable to eat too much. The emperor ate 6 in one go, which is not only enough, but also cold. The emperor still covered his head and nodded slightly. It's not very painful, it's very painful, didn't you say a word when you didn't see him? Man Bao thought for a while, and felt that it would take a while to boil the medicine, and he just ate cold melon after lunch, and if he took the medicine at this time, it might make his stomach worse, so he said, Then I will pierce your majesty. How many stitches? She said, it happens that I have medicine in my medicine box. After the needle is inserted, I will give you another moxibustion. I will take the medicine in the afternoon. The emperor was so painful that his forehead was sweating coldly. He nodded and changed his clothes under Guzhong's service. He took off his coat, put on a middle coat and lay on the couch. Man Bao lifted the hem of his clothes and pressed it on his big belly. Seeing that he couldn't help hissing, he twisted the needle. Find the acupuncture point and stick it down. Man Bao got 6 stitches, and after twisting it for a while, the emperor's complexion slowly improved. Although it is not very painful, but the stomach still has a dull pain, it is not very good anyway. Man Bao took a look at the emperor's face, and simply put 2 needles in his arm to let him relax completely. While feeling the dull pain in his abdomen, the emperor thought to himself that Zhou Man's needle was really useful. No wonder the people in the Taiyuan hospital didn't respond much to him calling her a 5th-rank official. With some thoughts in mind, the emperor fell asleep in a daze. He squinted for a moment, and when he regained his senses, Zhou Man had pulled out all the needles on his body, and he was holding something to dry his stomach. It was so warm that he was sweating. The queen who was sitting beside saw him wake up and smiled and said, "Your Majesty has been asleep for a quarter of an hour." The emperor was surprised, it's been so long. The emperor felt more and more sweat on his back, he moved a little uncomfortable. Man Bao stretched out his hand to hold him down. "Your Majesty, don't move." The emperor stopped. Guzhong, who was waiting on the side, broke down in cold sweat. Man Bao gave him medicinal moxibustion and said, "This is to warm the stomach. Your stomach is cold. This is slowly returning to the sun. Don't move around, or you will get burned." The emperor did not dare to move at all. Mingda and Chang Yu watched with relish, their eyes fixed on their father's belly, and Chang Yu said without covering his mouth, "The father's belly is bigger than the sister-in-law's." Only then did the emperor realize that the 2 daughters were also here, and he didn't care about getting burned. He immediately pushed away Zhou Man's hand and closed the clothes, and grabbed the coat from the side to cover his stomach, blushing and said, "You 2, why are you here?" He said angrily to the queen, "The daughters are all grown up, why don't you stop them?" The queen quickly apologized with a smile, and pulled Chang Yu and Mingde to go out. Chang Yu said, "Is there anything you can't watch? The royal father won't show us. Let's go to the 3rd brother. The 3rd brother's belly is bigger than the royal father's." Seeing that the moxibustion was not working, Man Bao put down the things in his hand, and after hearing the words, he said, "King Gong is too fat. If he gets fat again, it will be a hindrance to his body." When the emperor heard this, he immediately asked with concern, "But I think he is very strong, and it doesn't look like he is physically impaired." Man Baodao, "Your Majesty, if you don't believe me, you can ask the imperial physicians of the imperial hospital. Everything in this world is moderate, and the same goes for fat and thin. In terms of body shape, it is almost the same as that of the Crown Prince. His Majesty and Prince Gong are both a little fat." Man Bao said, "But your Majesty is slightly fat, and there is no major problem other than eating too much meat, but King Gong, he eats too much meat." Man Bao felt that King Gong was too rich, so he could eat like that in the right year. You must know that he is only 23 years old this year, and he has a big belly. What will he do when he stands up that year? The emperor thought about it, then looked at Man Bao, squinted his eyes and said, "Otherwise, would you give Prince Gong some conditioning?" Man Bao shook his head and said, "Prince Gong doesn't need to adjust, just don't give him meat, and then run around Miyaji every day, he will definitely lose weight in less than 2 months." The emperor's face sank and asked, "Are you playing tricks on him?" "No," Man Bao shook his head and said, "Your Majesty, if you don't believe me, let Prince Gong stay like this for 2 months. If he doesn't lose weight, I. Man Bao paused and said, I don't want a salary for 2 months. The emperor couldn't help but sarcastically, what a determination. However, the emperor believed it by 7 points. He didn't think Zhou Man would joke about his salary. Man Bao put away the medicine box, and the queen sent her 2 daughters back to the side hall. The emperor immediately told the queen what Zhou Man had just said, and discussed with her whether to make the third child thinner. The queen nodded again and again. She had long felt that the third child was too fat, but no matter how she persuaded, the child just liked meat and didn't like to move, so he gained weight day by day. Man Bao put away the medicine box and looked at Guzhong. I will prescribe a prescription for His Majesty. After taking the medicine, boil it, drink it after an hour, and drink a bowl after dinner at night. Guzhong quickly offered his pen and ink. While writing the prescription, Man Bao warned, don't eat too greasy things at night, you can eat more vegetables, preferably porridge to nourish your stomach, don't eat melons, and don't eat cold and ice things. Man Bao told them one by one, wrote 2 copies of the prescription, handed 1 copy to Guzhong after his own seal on the shore, and received 1 copy himself. Guzhong saw it, but said nothing. He really didn't bring Zhou Man into the case, and he couldn't get rid of it when something happened, so he turned a blind eye and pretended he didn't see it. Next update around 4 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1525. The emperor didn't know anything about this, so he dragged the queen and talked for a while, feeling that since Zhou Man was here, he might as well show the queen. The queen has a bad appetite recently. Man Bao felt his pulse and said, it's a bitter summer, there's no good way to do this, but your body is weak, don't use too many ice basins in the house, or use a fan to fan the air, or sit in a well-ventilated place, be careful not to catch cold at night. Man Bao ranted a lot of words, and even the emperor who was listening on the side thought she was too long-winded, but the queen involved listened with great interest. When he finally sent her away, the emperor breathed a sigh of relief. You look young, why are you talking about it like this? The queen asked with a smile, does your majesty still have a stomachache? The emperor felt it for a while, shook his head and said, don't say, her acupuncture is quite useful. I heard from the prince that their imperial physician office will teach in different subjects, and one of them is acupuncture. The queen also felt good. Don't look at her bitter summer this year. In fact, it was better than in previous years. She was very uncomfortable at this time last year, especially when the catkins were flying. She once felt that she could not survive that summer. This is the first time the emperor has been stabbed with needles, and he feels good, let alone the queen who is often stabbed. It is precisely because of this that the empress did her best to persuade the emperor to reorganize the imperial physician's office. If Zhou Man's abilities were as written in their booklet, he could teach his disciples and then spread them to medical offices in various places, and then treat diseases for the people of the world, then I don't know how many people would benefit. The emperor also began to seriously think about this matter, and he thought more deeply than the queen. Acupuncture uses less medicine, and the cost should be less, and some poor people can also use it. The emperor's fingers couldn't help tapping his thigh, and he said in deep thought, by then, a sum of money will be allocated from the national treasury every year, and local medical offices will purchase some commonly used medicinal materials, which can also provide relief to patients who cannot afford medicines. The queen nodded again and again, that's exactly what it means. However, this charter has to be settled, lest the people who really should help don't help and feed some squirrels. The emperor thought for a while, then turned his head and said to Guzhong, this is what the prince is doing, call him here. I asked him if there are regulations there. Guzhong hurriedly responded, bowed, and walked out to let the Prince Qian come. He just ordered to turn around and go back, and saw Zhou Man, who had not left the hall for a long time, sitting happily with the 2 workers. He didn't know what to say. Zhou Man and Princess Changjia were looking up and laughing. Princess Mingda rolled her eyes with laughter. Gu Zhong shook his head slightly and turned back. The empress in the palace also vaguely heard laughter and asked, "What are they laughing at?" Immediately, someone from the palace went out to ask, and soon came back. "Master Zhou Xiao is telling the princesses an interesting thing about playing by the river in the village when she was a child. The two princesses like it very much. More than just liking it, if Man Bao said that the sun was too big and didn't want to bask in the sun, the two of them almost took her to the river to dig mud and play together. Well, Daming Palace also has it. And because the Daming Palace has not been completed, it occupies a large area, so it is quite wild. The riverside has not been operated at all. There are aquatic plants in the places that should grow water plants, and mud in the places where there should be mud. There are even wild ducks in some tidal flats with lush water plants. There was no sign that it was coming from the palace. Finally, when the sun went down, it was not so vicious. Chang Yu, who was pulling Man Bao and Mingda by the river, saw the frightened wild ducks flying up, and couldn't help screaming with joy. Man Bao wasn't surprised, but wanted to know if there were wild duck eggs in the aquatic plants, so he lifted up his skirt, tied it up, rolled up his sleeves, and went deep into the grass. Chang Yu immediately followed, and Mingda also wanted to go, but was quickly pulled by the palace servant. "Princess, you can't catch a cold." Mingda felt a little regretful, so he stood on the bank and waited for them, and pointed them in the direction. "Come up some more." The wild duck just flew away from above. Man Bao pulled the lush aquatic plants on the beach, and finally found a hay nest with Princess Changjiao, opened it and saw 5 blue-white duck eggs. The two of them couldn't help but snorted, and reached out to take it. Man Bao also shook it, and said happily, "The days are not long, you can eat it all." Chang Yu took 3, Man Bao took 2, and the two happily squeezed out of the water and grass, and showed the duck eggs to Mingda. "Mingda is also too novel, how do you eat this?" "It can be fried with chives," Man Bao said. "Scrambled eggs with chives is delicious, and fried duck eggs should be delicious too." "Eggs anyway." Chang Yu was reluctant to eat it all, so he took one and said, "I want to wash this one and put it on the case for offering." "No one is allowed to eat it." Mingda also wanted one, so he squeezed one in his hand. Man Bao didn't care, he directly gave the 2 eggs in his hand to the palace servant. "This egg will last for about 20 days, the weather is hot, if you it will go bad if you don't eat it." Mingda regretted, "Is there no way to make it not bad?" "Yes, let's see if it's laying eggs. If it is, find a hen to hatch it, so that the egg becomes a duckling, and the duckling can lay eggs again when it grows up, so won't it be broken?" Ha ha ha. Man Bao was just joking, but Mingda and Chang Yu actually took it seriously. After thinking about it, they thought this was a good idea, so they decided to take it back and let someone find a hen to hatch the eggs. "How can this be seen as an egg?" Man Bao was stunned for a moment, carefully recalled her mother's egg selection steps, scratched her head and said, "You have to light the oil lamp, and then point the egg at the oil lamp and look at it to see if it is an egg." The maids and servants on the side. There was a palace maid who was not too young before entering the palace and knew how to look, so she stepped forward and said, "Princess, this servant knows how to recognize it." So the group ran back to the palace, directly closed the curtains, lit the oil lamp, and faced the selection of eggs. Luckily, 3 of the 5 eggs were hatching eggs. Mingda and Chang Yu chose the one that seemed pleasing to the eye, and then looked at Man Bao. "Are you really not going to choose one?" Man Bao is not very interested in raising ducks. There are many ducks in her small village, so there is no need to raise them all the way in the palace. But she rarely has one thing in common with her friends, so after thinking about it, she picked up the remaining one, nodded and said, "Okay, but it's not convenient for me to carry, can you help me?" The brooding hens are put together to incubate the eggs. Mingden nodded immediately, took the duck egg from her hand and said with a smile, "I'll keep it for you." Seeing that they had finally negotiated, The palace servants on the side reminded politely, "Lord Zhou Xiao, it's getting late." When Man Bao looked out, he realized that time was flying by, and it was almost time for dinner. She got up immediately. "I have to go back, or the ship will be out of service in a while. The most important thing is that she still has to hand over the medical case to the Thai hospital, and the Thai hospital doesn't know who is on duty tonight." See you at 8 p.m. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1526. Unfortunately, Xiao Yuan was on duty today. So when Man Bao stepped on the setting sun and entered the Thai hospital, when he handed in the medical case, Xiao Yuan stood up nervously. "Your Majesty has eaten a bad stomach." Man Bao nodded. "The stomach is cold and too full to eat, probably because of inflammation." Xiao Yuan was looking at the pulse case written by Man Bao, and when she saw that she was the only one who made the diagnosis, she couldn't help but feel anxious. "Why did I only call you over?" Man Bao said, "I happened to be in Daming Palace at that time. The Imperial Hospital also has an imperial physician there. After all, most of the royal family is now at the Daming Palace, and the Imperial Hospital has naturally dispatched an imperial physician there, but the two palaces are not far apart, so the Imperial Court also has an imperial physician. Except for Zhou Man, the imperial physicians of the Imperial Hospital were all on duty on both sides of the shift. To treat the emperor, you must have more than 2 imperial physicians. Even if one of them only records, it is also a kind of testimony. This is the rule." Xiao Yuan was thinking that Man Bao did not understand this rule. After all, it was her first time seeing the emperor. Just as he was about to remind her, Man Bao said, "Master Gu hinted not to enter the medical case at the beginning. Since he is also the imperial physician of the Imperial Hospital, Man Bao will of course understand the rules of the Imperial Hospital, which she still understands." To this end, Bai Shan also studied with her specially. Finally, the two people who had seen many cases in the Taiyuan Hospital came to a conclusion that the rules of the Taiyuan Hospital were to obey the emperor in everything, obey the emperor's rules for innocuous matters, and obey the emperor's rules for important matters. The emperor's personal decision. Be flexible on this basis. So Man Bao understood the rules set by the emperor, and it was over. At that time, after studying the rules of the Taiyuan Hospital, the two still felt that the Taiyuan Hospital was too arrogant as a courtier. How could they listen to the emperor? The benefits came out right now, and Xiao Yuanzheng didn't say anything immediately when he heard that Gu Zhong didn't want to be involved in the case. Gu Zhong is the emperor's confidant. I am afraid that this is not what Gu Zhong said, but the emperor, right? Xiao Yuan is turning around and stepping aside to let Man Bao go to court. Who knew that Man Bao filled out the case file, put the pulse case and the prescription in it, and then showed it to him. Xiao Yuanzheng, it's my first time entering the case, do you think there is any problem? Xiao Yuanzheng. Lord Zhou Xiao actually doesn't have to show it to me. Man Bao said, but don't you have to have 2 people's seals to see your Majesty's doctor? There was no one at that time, and now you are here again. You can help me print one by the way. When the case is investigated in the future, if there is a problem, someone will give her a proof. Xiao Yuanzheng, Lord Zhou Xiao, you don't need to say this clearly. Seeing that he couldn't get out of his body, Xiao Yuanzheng was quite simple. He picked up the case file and looked at it seriously, then nodded and said, it's written to a standard, there's nothing wrong with it, but I haven't personally seen His Majesty's pulse, so I can't sign it for you. Print. Man Bao was not reluctant, nodded and said, okay, then this is the case. Anyway, the rules of the hospital are to obey the emperor. As long as there is no problem, the case will not be investigated. Xiao Yuan was instructing Man Bao to file the case. Seeing that there were only two of them left and right, he simply sat on the chair and sighed, "Your Majesty is too greedy, how can you eat more melons?" Man Bao also wanted to eat melon, so he gestured and said, "I ate 6. Xiao Yuan Zheng, this is too inattentive, and the people who serve it don't remind me. How can I make it so greedy?" Man Bao didn't care. During the festivals, when her sister-in-law made many delicious things, she couldn't help eating more. She often prescribed hawthorn slices for Xiaoxi, but "Your Majesty really shouldn't eat so many melons at one time, you can eat them separately, 2 in the morning, 2 at noon, and 2 more before and after dinner in the afternoon." Xiao Yuanzheng couldn't help but scolded, "Don't talk nonsense, that's still overeating, melons are cold, how can you eat so much in one day? But most of the stomach and intestines can tolerate it, and it will adjust itself after a few days." Xiao Yuanzheng was shocked. It was the first time he saw an imperial physician who arranged his body in this way. The average person would forget it, greedy for food and drink, but you are a doctor, you are an imperial physician. After a long while, Xiao Yuanzheng swallowed his saliva and asked, "Don't you tell your Majesty this too?" "I didn't, and I'm not stupid. There were still many people serving in the temple at that time. I didn't know where to hide, so I didn't want to leave the name of the traitor in the history books." Xiao Yuanzheng breathed a sigh of relief, otherwise, even if she was a 5th-grade Xiaozuan, even if she was young, he would have to punish her on behalf of the Taiyuan hospital. "Don't say this again, especially to your Majesty and the royal family, otherwise they are really greedy for food and something happens, you and I can't afford it." Alas, in 2 days, Lord Wei will remonstrate again. "Already? It's just a few more melons, isn't it?" "Why not? Gastrointestinal inflammation can also kill people." Seeing Man Bao's surprised expression, Xiao Yuanzheng touched his beard and said, "Drinking water can kill people, let alone eating melons, is this surprising?" "But isn't this all an accident?" Man Bao said, "there are very few people who drink water and die. How can they be included in a case that has a reason to follow?" "Xiao Yuanzheng, I talk about accidents with you, and you talk about medical theory with me?" Xiao Yuanzheng suddenly didn't want to talk to Man Bao anymore. Seeing that she had a tendency to go on talking, Xiao Yuan was rushing ahead of her and said, "Isn't Master Zhou Xiao still going back to Chongguan Museum? I think it's getting dark, and the palaces will be locked, right?" Only then did Man Bao realize that time flies so fast, it's getting dark now. She immediately got up to say goodbye and left quickly. She was so young, she left the hospital and ran to the East Palace without paying any attention to her image. It is also taboo to sprint in the palace, but after the palace servants along the road saw that it was full of treasures, they looked up at the sky and silently pretended not to see it. Man Bao ran into the East Palace in a hurry, and then stopped to let out his breath. Bai Shanzhen was reading a book not far away, waiting for her by the way. Seeing her running into the door, he asked, "Hey, what did you do to come back so late?" He said, "Today, your disciple Lu Yunu also went to Chongguan Pavilion specially, saying that there are 2 illnesses that he was unsure about and wanted to ask you for advice, but because you were not there, Imperial Physician Zheng followed." Man Bao calmed down and said, "I went to Daming Palace today, and I went there by boat, and I went to touch wild duck eggs with Mingda Changio and the others. You don't know, Daming Palace is fun, it's not like this side. The road has been drawn, people can only walk on the human road, and many places there are still deserted, but in order not to be ugly, a lot of grass seeds have been sown, some of them are particularly beautiful, and there are grass everywhere. She has also dug up 3 plants that are not in the palace here in the past 2 days. Keek scanned it and found that there are many plants near the foot of the mountain that have not been recorded. Unfortunately, she still has it for a while. Can't get there. Ha 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 ha, successfully joined forces with Gu Wanyan. The big thing is done, I will add more tomorrow, yeah. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1527. Bai Shan kept dinner for Man Bao and kept it warm in her room. Taking advantage of the fact that the courtyard gate in the palace was locked and could walk freely, Bai Shan followed her to her room, watched her take the food off the stove, and said, "Sir, there is no class today, so I watched it in the library. One day of books, I heard people say that Chongguan Museum did not arrange other tasks for Mr. Man Bao said, "Don't worry, when they know what your master is capable of, they will let him participate in book repair. The lecturers at the Chongguan Museum do not just give lectures to them, but also do some editing or commentary work at ordinary times. I also do some text research, etc., and occasionally I go to the Zenshifu to help find and organize materials, just like the bachelor in the Hongguan Museum going to the Sixth Servant or the Imperial Walk. Also very busy. But now Mr. Zhuang is very leisurely. It's not a good thing to have a leisurely job, it means that your ability is not recognized." But Man Bao didn't think there was anything wrong. When she first became a doctor, she was very leisurely. Few patients were willing to see her for treatment, but as time passed, her ability was revealed. Not only the patients liked to look for her, but even the doctors liked to look for her. "So time can witness everything," Man Bao said. "Just wait, sir, you won't be in a hurry." Mr. Zhuang is not in a hurry. He also enjoys reading books in the library every day. He only has 2 classes in 3 days, 1 book of filial piety and 1 Tao Te Ching, and the prince has not yet taken the Tao Te Ching. Say what you want to say, no taboos. Not to mention, apart from being rather tangled when speaking of the book of filial piety, Mr. Zhuang has no worries. After seeing Mr. Zhuang's gray beard, the editors of Chongguan Museum, who were a little despised by him, couldn't instruct him to do rough work like a newcomer, even if they upheld the tradition of respecting the old and caring for the young. After all, Confucian wine is a museum thing, and the waiters in the Chongguan Museum also learn more Confucian classics, but they can't be old, but they can still do it. What's more, there are still 3 direct disciples in the Chongguan Hall, not to mention Zhou Man's official rank. Even in terms of Bai Shan's face, no one will deliberately embarrass him. Not bad, on Bai Shan's face. Although he has only been in school for less than a month, the lecturers in the hall have already discovered Bai Shan's intelligence. Except for the occasional questions that are difficult for them to answer, this child is really smart. Even Yang Hesha couldn't help saying to the magistrate Tang in private, "If he had been born 10 years earlier, he would just be able to make a pair with you and go to the Imperial College together, and Kong Jiju might not really be able to resist expelling both of you. Study abroad." The county magistrate Tang knew how tricky Bai Shan was when he heard it, and couldn't help laughing. A few days later, when he entered the palace for office, he couldn't help but turn to Chongguan Hall to see them. "The melons and fruits in my village have ripened a lot, but it's a pity that you are all in the palace, otherwise I can send you some." Man Bao was still thinking about the melons that the emperor ate, and asked, "Are there any melons?" The magistrate Tang couldn't help laughing, nodding, and saying, "I didn't have it before, but now there are many people selling melons in Beijing. You want to eat it, and I'll buy some for you when you leave the palace next time." At this time last year, Man Bao and the others hadn't come to Beijing yet, so they didn't know that the capital was rich in melons at this time, so they couldn't help asking, "Are the melons in Beijing so early?" "No," Tang County magistrate suppressed a smile and said, "that is to say, some zhuangzi have been planted in the house or near the warm soup in advance, and the others will have to wait for another 10 or so before they come out." "Then why are they sold on the streets of the capital? Will people who can grow melons near Ventang sell them outside? And the price is probably not comparable to ordinary melons, right?" The county magistrate Tang said with a smile, "Originally, most of these melons were kept for myself to eat or give as gifts, and they didn't make much money by selling them, but since yesterday, a lot of traders have appeared in the capital, holding melons and saying that they are your Majesty's capital. The melon I like to eat costs half a tael of silver. Of course, Master Tang would not eat such expensive melons, but when Bai Shan and the others go to rest again, it will be the first day of the 6th lunar month. At that time, the first batch of melons grown in the fields should be ripe, and the price will definitely come down. It's okay to invite them to eat a few. Man Bao stopped talking immediately. She went to the Daming Palace to see the Crown Princess in the past 2 days, and she deliberately walked around the main hall, so as not to encounter the Emperor. She put the Emperor's bad stomach in the file, and kept her mouth shut with Xiao Yuan Zheng, who knew about it. It was obvious that she only told Bai Shan, and Bai Shan didn't say anything, but the courtiers knew about it. Man Bao and Xiao Yuan were inquiring about it, and they knew that the next day the Emperor went to court as usual, and there was nothing to do all day. Man Bao even went to give him another acupuncture. As a result, in the afternoon, officials from Mengxia province went to the Taiyuan hospital to check the medical records and check the medical records newly entered by the Emperor. Of course, the officials of the province at that time did not take it too seriously, and Xiao Yuan Zheng also hinted that His Majesty did not want too many people to know about this matter, but after a night, Wei Ji and other courtiers still knew about it. When courtiers like Zhao Qiuagong knew about this, they would at most laugh at the Emperor face to face. Is the melon delicious? In the end, Wei Ji went to Daming Palace to block the Emperor's advice, thinking that if he didn't take care of his own body, he didn't take care of the country. As an emperor, he didn't even have the ability to control himself. When doing things, it is obvious that you must forget the original intention of running the government. He thought that he had to sound the alarm for the emperor to prevent him from falling step by step and becoming more and more indulgent. So scolded the emperor to hide his face and apologize, and this matter was over. But the emperor was in a very bad mood for the past 2 days, and he scolded several people, especially those in the capital who did not know how to eat melons. He could scold him again at any time. However, the emperor did not expect that it was not Wei Ji who was scolding him this time, but Lord Tang. The magistrate Tang said with a smile, "My father wrote a letter today, thinking that this ethos in the capital is because the superiors are good and the inferiors must be more important, so your Majesty will act more cautiously in his words and deeds in the future. Today, some people buy melons at high prices because your Majesty loves melons. Then there may be someone with will in the future who will pluck the wheat and destroy the rice in order to plant your Majesty's beloved melon, just to plant melon." Man Bao was stunned, so serious. Even Bai Shan was surprised. Who would do that? Tang County Magistrate smiled and said, "A melon is half a tael of silver, and 2 are 1 tael. 1 acre of wheat can't sell for so much money. The people are so ignorant, they don't think that there are too many melons and they can't sell it. They only you can see the price in front of you. You said that with such a high price of melons, are you planting wheat or melons?" Of course it was a melon. There is a small Zhuangzi, and Bai Shan and Man Bao, who also love money, secretly replied in their hearts. Tang County Magistrate said, "Your Majesty asked me to enter the palace today for this reason. This is the blood case caused by melons. I wanted to save the manuscript yesterday, but I ran to eat the melon and didn't want to code, so I didn't save the manuscript. But I will try to add more today. The next update will be around 4 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1528. Although the words of Wei Ji and Mr. Tang were very unpleasant, and the emperor didn't like to hear them, he still listened to them. He was really afraid that the farmers would improve their fields for melon fields because of the great profit of melons this year. Therefore, they specially summoned the magistrates of Chang'an County and Wanyan County, and asked them to do a good job in persuading farmers and mulberries this year. It was also because he was so busy that the emperor didn't think to settle accounts with Zhou Man at first, and he forgot about it when he had time. But Man Bao didn't know, she had been quietly hiding from the emperor. She didn't even go to give the emperor acupuncture. Instead, she carefully taught Xiao Yuanzheng, and then left her hand to Xiao Yuanzheng. Xiao Yuanzheng was eager to learn more about acupuncture and moxibustion from her, so he followed Man Bao to the side hall, and found two servants who had a bad stomach and got 2 needles. The cold air went to give the emperor a needle. Because someone went to take it on his behalf, so although Man Bao avoided the emperor, he still ran to Daming Palace every day. Occasionally, he had plenty of time. After seeing the crown princess, he went to play with Mingda Changio everywhere, and even gave it to Princess Mingda. Condition the body. In the beginning, when Man Bao didn't even get a pulse, he gave Princess Mingda an injection. Mingda's maids wanted to stop him, but they found that the princess' appetite was indeed better after the injection, and she would sleep more peacefully at night. Then opened one eye and closed one eye and let it go. Forget it, Zhou Man will never harm the princess anyway, and she is rarely involved in the case when she pierces the queen. His Majesty's harem is a bit different from others, not to mention the distance. Even when the emperor was the first emperor, the harem would inevitably be framed. Today there are very few. Even if there is jealousy, it will never bring disaster to the children. The queen takes care of the harem very well. It is precisely because of the relaxed environment that Man Bao can give Mingda needles so freely. When she saw them smearing rouge on their faces, Man Bao said with great interest that she had found some rouge recipes while reading medical books in Chongquen Museum, which looked very good. I plan to play with Mingda Changio. Looking at Mingda's old mama listening to these words, she secretly said, if this was in the previous dynasty or the emperor, they would not dare to let the princesses touch such medicinal materials and use such rouge. Who knows what is hidden in this matter? The scourge of it? For now, they can play if they want. So, the old mama watched Man Bao lead the 2 princesses to Hitai Hospital to get a lot of medicinal materials, and then went to the small kitchen for a while and disliked the smell of the kitchen, so the 3 of them squatted in the corridor together to make a fire. Makeup. Man Bao didn't understand them very well. While weighing the medicinal herbs with the nickname, he asked, "Where is the smell in the kitchen?" I went in and turned around. It's obviously quite fragrant. The soup is still hanging on the stove. I heard that it is to cook noodles for dinner. But this is for the princesses. Man Bao can't eat any more. She has to set off from here and rush back to Chongquen Pavilion before dinner, otherwise the East Palace will be locked as soon as the sun sets. Chang Yu said, "The chicken was killed in the kitchen, didn't you smell that bloody smell?" Man Bao thought for a while and shook his head. Human blood seems to be bloodier than chicken blood. There is no way to answer this, Chang Yu simply refused. Man Bao sorted and placed the weighed herbs, while Mingda and Chang Yu sat in front of a small table and pounded the herbs. They doubted the abilities of Zhou Man and the 2 princesses. They had never heard that rouge was made of herbs. Shouldn't rouge be made of flowers? Mingda and Chang Yu can only sit and let people put on makeup. Now they are still young, they only stick flowers, or paint their foreheads with yellow, and they don't even have enough powder, but the maids don't miss their faces. Rouge also buy less. If you buy more, you will naturally know how this rouge is made. To put it bluntly, isn't it made of red and blue flowers? A good rouge will add other flowers to it to make a better color and aroma. How can it be made of herbs? Man Bao was very confident. He brought Mingda and Chang Yu to pound the medicinal herbs and cook them again. After 3 days of hard work, just when the queen couldn't help but ask, Man Bao asked Chang Yu to leave the Shangxi bureau. Get a piece of suet? Not to mention the palace ladies, even the old maids were stunned, and then watched Man Bao dissolve the sheep oil and mix it with the light purple rouge they had made for 3 days. Lighter. After Man Bao was reconciled, he put it in the freezer and froze it. He stared at it from morning to afternoon. When he opened the jar, it solidified and the color was pale. It may be because the uniformity was not very good, and some were light purple. And some are milky white. Man Bao smelled it and felt that it was not bad, so he became proud and gave it to Chang Yu and Mingde. They both smelled it and nodded. Fragrant is incense, but is this rouge? Although they have never used rouge, they have seen people use it. Okay. Mingde hesitated. Is this an ointment? Man Bao said, didn't you say that rouge is what makes people have a good color? This can make people have a good color, naturally it is rouge. Man Bao showed them the recipe he had copied down. No, it's all written on it, it's called Run Rouge. Chang Yu and Mingde no longer doubted, but looked at the rouge in the jar together and asked, then this can be used. Okay. Man Bao took some with her fingertips and rubbed it in the palm of her hand, then wiped it on her face, and finally wiped the back of her hand. She glanced at the back of her hand, nodded and said, it's really good. Man Bao immediately ran to open the medicine box, took out 3 small wooden jars, and said to Mingde Change I want to dig some. They made a lot of them, 1 big jar, although Man Bao brought 3 wooden jars, but they were not big, so the 2 of them nodded shyly and asked her to dig out 3 small jars and go. Man Bao happily carried the medicine box and went back to the East Palace. She walked on the front foot, and the emperor and the queen arrived on the back. As soon as she entered the side hall of her daughters, the emperor looked around and asked, where is Zhou Man? Chang Yu was still studying this rouge with Mingde, and when he heard the emperor's voice, he rushed out immediately, Father, Queen, come quickly, we have made something good. The emperor said, I came to see if you have burned the side hall. For 3 days in a row, I saw smoke coming from here. Mingde ran forward and hugged his mother's arm, and asked with a smile, then why did you come here to ask now? Of course it's because it's out of time. The upper reaches of the Yellow River have recently melted, and the water is still a little too much. At this moment, the governor of Shenzhou has sent people to report that the Yellow River is in danger. The matter that the emperor ate too much melon was also over. Wei Ji was already calculating with the Ministry of Household the amount of food relief to be paid this year, and it would be sent to Shenzhou in a few days. There is also the Ministry of Industry, trying not to let the Yellow River burst its banks. The regulations were only set today. It was rare for the emperor to get off work on time. It happened that there was no smoke in the side hall today, so he curiously called the queen to come and have a look. Not only did someone scolded me, but they also scolded me with a whip. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1529. Chang Yu and Mingde excitedly and proudly took out half the jar of ointment to show the emperor, Father, Mother, this is the rouge we made. Looking at the contents of the jar, the emperor praised loudly without pausing, okay. Our daughters will be able to make rouge. The emperor didn't use it, and he had seen the queen and other concubines use it. Naturally, he knew what rouge was like, so he felt that the rouge made by his daughters was broken. However, he obviously didn't know how happy they were, and the emperor didn't want to hit them, so he complimented them vigorously, but turned around and asked Gu Zhong to pick some good rouge for the 2 princesses. The emperor took their hands and said with a smile, it's not easy for your mother to raise you. This rouge made by yourself can be used by your mother. You can use what I gave you. Chang Yu and Mingde responded without hesitation, shoved the rouge jar into their mother's arms, and the lunch was given to her. Queen. She looked down at the rouge in her arms, and was speechless for a while. Even though she is well informed, she has never seen rouge of this color. Glancing at the emperor, the queen handed the rouge in her arms to Aunt Chang, and thanked them for their filial piety with a smile. The couple talked with the 2 little girls for a while, and then walked away with rouge in their reluctant eyes. Returning to the main hall, the emperor squeezed the queen's hand in a pleasing manner, and said to Aunt Chang, "Put this rouge away, Zitong, how about taking time out of the palace to buy you a good rouge and come back in person?" The queen took her hand away from him and smiled, "Your Majesty, the concubine is not so stingy. It is the filial piety of the children, so let's save it." The emperor pulled his hand back again and said with a smile, "The two children are tossing and doing, and I don't know what to add. The color doesn't look good. Filial piety, we just know it, we don't have to use it." "I don't have it either. I'm afraid they don't know the depths. What if they damage their faces?" Only then did the queen give him a good face, and said angrily, "The people around them are not ignorant, how can they be used?" Aunt Chang interjected at the right time. The recipe was brought by Mr. Zhou Xiao, and the three of them made it together. "The people around Princess Gangmingda have dug up some and sent them to the imperial hospital, and asked the imperial physicians to help see if they can be used." The emperor asked, "What did the imperial physicians say?" "The person hasn't come back yet." Aunt Chang bowed and said, "When the person comes back, the servant will ask her to come over and report back." The emperor nodded, and then said to the queen, "Mingda and Changjiu have been playing crazy these days because of Zhou Man, so you can take care of it. Girls should still focus on chastity." The queen said, "It's rare that your majesty would say such a thing." The emperor was stunned for a moment, only to realize that he had slapped himself in the face. In the past, Changjiu and Mingda were naughty, and they were all petted by him, and the queen was in charge. Every time the queen wanted to be cruel, the emperor would say, "My daughter, it's normal for you to be more relaxed, and it's okay to be lively." "Okay, why do you have to ask them to be chaste and gentle?" The emperor was slightly uncomfortable, feeling that he was either angry with Zhou Man, or worried about Shengzhou. He found a reason for himself. "Zhou Man, you are too untrustworthy. You clearly promised not to write a medical case, but you go back on it. Don't let the two children play too closely with her." The queen smiled and said, "But His Majesty didn't ask her about her sins, and obviously knew that what she did was right." She smiled and said, "There's nothing wrong with following the rules. I've been trying to teach my two children the rules recently, so let's start with this one." The emperor did not expect that when he was coming, he had to become a teaching material for his two daughters, but it was the other way around, so he stopped talking. The queen was relieved to see that he was silent. The maid who went to inquire about the imperial doctor quickly came back and replied. She lowered her head and said, "The imperial doctor said that this is not rouge, this is facial grease. It is used to treat dry and cracked face in winter, and it belongs to ointment." But after the imperial physicians read the prescription, it is said that Dr. Zhou Xiao has cut down some medicinal materials, so it is not a problem for the princesses to use them every day. What the maid didn't dare to say was that the two imperial physicians said after researching, "This dose of Beiji, even if it is all applied to the face, is fine, right? Just use it after you use it." Princess Mingda and Princess Changjiu have swollen faces and still have malignant sores. Why did you use this recipe as an ointment? In fact, it's still not as good as using Beiji powder. Why doesn't Master Zhou Xiao prescribe Beiji powder? The palace maid did not tell the masters about these discussions. She knew what the masters wanted to hear, and she knew that the ointment could be used anyway. The emperor didn't take it to heart, and smiled with the queen. Since it can be used, the queen can use it, but the color is really not good looking. Didn't Zhou Man say to take them to make rouge? How did it make an ointment? Sure enough, doctor, everything you do ends up being made into medicine. The queen was thoughtful. She reached out and rubbed a piece on the back of her hand, and saw that the light purple ointment melted away. After wiping it, nothing was left on the back of her hand, and it naturally lost its color. The emperor also saw it, shook his head, and already decided that the rouge was bad. Man Bao, who ran back to the East Palace with the rouge in his arms, happily showed off to Bai Shan, I saw the recipe in the library some time ago, only then did I know that there is a special recipe for cracked hands and feet, and there are even doctors. In spring and summer, ointment is applied to hands to prevent chapped in autumn and winter. Bai Shan took the wooden jar and asked, "But we don't need it now, it's still far from winter." Man Bao said, "This is for my mother and my sister-in-law. They have holes in their hands all the year round. Aren't Bai and Bai eldest brother going to deliver letters home in the latter half of the year? I will let them take them back." Bai Shan nodded, returned it to her, and then asked, "You gave it to your eldest sister-in-law, but won't the second and third sister-in-law give it? After all, it's a long way to send things back." Man Bao was stunned for a moment, scratched his head and said, "Princess Mingda and I just made one jar. Wouldn't it be bad to dig up 2 more small wooden jars?" Bai Shan was curious, "Can't you do it yourself?" Yes, but it's only for 2 days, and some medicinal materials are quite expensive, at least a lot of lily petals are needed. This stuff isn't cheap." Bai Shan thought for her seriously, "Then you can figure out another recipe, and then go to Princess Mingda and the others to make another one. Don't you all have prescriptions with similar effects but some differences?" Man Bao's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help giving him a thumbs up. "Your method is good, then I'll think about it. I remember that there were 2 recipes in the back of that medical book, but those 2 recipes are for acne treatment. Last time I saw Brother Lu grow one on his forehead, so he can try it out first." "Bai Shan, is he okay?" "It's okay, he's always in the kitchen, and it will definitely grow longer." Bai Shan didn't know why, but suddenly felt sympathy for Brother Saturday. "I am really surprised by my wife. Man Bao actually ranked 3rd in the monthly ticket list, which has already set a record in this book. No, I want to add more, and no one will stop me. See you at 8 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1530. Man Bao happily put away the ointment, turned around and plunged into the library, flipped through the thin medical book, and borrowed it directly back into the room to continue research. It's a pity that they were going to leave the palace the next day, so Man Bao copied the recipe and planned to ponder it carefully after leaving the palace. When she entered the system and took a class with teacher Mo, she also gave him a copy and asked him to help with research. Teacher Mo just glanced at it and said, "Do you want to make skincare products?" Man Bao blinked suspiciously. "Skincare products? Oh, you haven't spawned the skincare industry at the moment. It's a hugely profitable industry, but I don't recommend you get involved, because it doesn't benefit you much from medical research, but it will kill your will and enthusiasm." Therefore teacher Mo refused to study. Not only that, but also said to Man Bao, "I suggest you not to involve in this aspect." Man Bao was very interested, "But isn't acne also a disease?" Teacher Mo said, "What kind of acne can this recipe treat?" "The real acne recipe is a little more complicated than this. This amount and simple preparation method can moisten the face and relieve some acne." Teacher Mo immediately went offline, and after a while, he brought a book and a notebook, put them directly in the teaching materials, and said, "You can take a look at this if you are interested, but do you still have time? I arranged the last time. For the removal of your liver cirrhosis, you haven't recorded the video to me, haven't you done it yet?" Man Bayadao, "I did it twice, but I felt it wasn't enough, so I didn't record the video." "No matter how unfamiliar it is, you can record the video to me next time, so I can know your problem," said Mr. Mo. "Now there are too many things in your world and too little time to study." Man Bao doesn't think so. After entering Chongguan Hall, I have an hour every night to study in the teaching room, which is more stable than before. But the more you learn, the deeper you study, and your previous study time is obviously not enough. Teacher Mo values Manbao very much, not only because she is smart, but also because she and him may realize these medicines after learning these medicines. You must know that in his world, there is very little possibility of realizing medical skills. I have never seen him doing teaching and research work. Is there a treasure for Manbao's disease? However, considering the situation in Manbao's world, he also mainly studies ancient Chinese medicine, so most of their study directions are ancient Chinese medicine. The liver cirrhosis resection studied this time is a surgical operation under the treatment of traditional Chinese medicine. It is a famous case of cooperation between Chinese and Western medicine in ancient medicine. Teacher Mo also encouraged Man Bao, learn this case well as soon as possible. Since you spent so much time at that time, it's best to take the time to find out if there is a corresponding patient, and maybe you can try this treatment plan. Man Baidao, I'm afraid it will be difficult. The early stage of traditional Chinese medicine conditioning is okay, and in the later stage, combined with liver cirrhosis resection, unless he also falls off a horse, or is stabbed in the stomach, or I can open their stomachs and cut them. Liver. Teacher Mo, it's really stupid. However, he can only express his disappointment and does not recommend Man Bao to make unrealistic efforts. In this respect, he is very similar to Drg in Yazhu. He believes that treating patients also depends on fate. They treat diseases. The fate of the patient depends on the patient himself. Therefore, if the patients themselves are unwilling to treat the disease, they will not persuade them. This is everyone's choice. Even so, Teacher Mo glared at Man Bao and urged her to study this case as soon as possible so that they could move on to the next topic. Thinking of this, Teacher Mo regrets giving her the book and book again. What if she can't stand the temptation and changes her temperament? Even if you don't change your temperament, it's a pity to spend time on it. But before he could regret it, Man Bao had already pressed the button to take out the textbook, then said hello to him and went out. Of course, Man Bao couldn't read it page by page. She was used to it. To read the books in Teacher Mo's world, she had to follow the catalog. Unlike their world, where a sentence needs to be read and studied over and over again, their writing habits allow her to know the meaning at a glance. Therefore, the thin medical book she read in this world requires her to read it repeatedly to understand it, but the medical book given by Teacher Mo does not. Sometimes she dislikes it being too long-winded, and always describes the pathology and treatment methods in detail. Bai Shan, who has read Man Bao's medical book, insists that the reason why she is so nagging when giving a doctor's order is because of suffering. Influence of these medical books. So Man Bao got the medical book, opened the catalog directly, found the catalog of acne, and started to read it. First, he scanned the psychological and physical damage caused by acne at a glance, and turned 3 or 4 pages before he saw acne. Various reasons for the formation. Man Bao let out a breath and thought while lying on the bed flipping through the book, so why does Teacher Mo think she reads books faster? Obviously there is a lot of nonsense. Why do you have to read it word by word? It's not an interesting story or text, so she doesn't read it. Man Bao quickly flipped through more than 20 pages and heard the Keek broadcast in his mind, Su Yu is here. Man Bao pricked his ears to listen, but still didn't hear anything. After sighing about his ear strength, Man Bao received the book into the system, and then began to shoot the mosquitoes, driving them out of the mosquito net, and then turned off the lights and lay down to sleep. As soon as she lay down, she couldn't help yawning several times in a row, tears bursting from the corners of her eyes, and she heard Keek say, "She's gone." Man Bao closed his eyes in a daze and fell asleep peacefully. Before going to bed, she thought, in fact, Su Yu is still beneficial, at least she can guarantee to fall asleep before Haze Hung every night. She is still young, she needs to sleep more to grow taller. Perhaps it was because of this idea before falling asleep that Man Bao failed to wake up in time the next day, and Bai Shan, who was still anxious to leave the palace, ran over to knock on her door. Seeing her hair was messed up and her face full of anxiety, he asked, "Why didn't Su Yu call you?" Man Bao took a while to react, yawned, and said, It happens that she is on a monthly break today, so she doesn't need to wait. However, the water was prepared for Man Bao and placed in a wooden bucket in the house. In the summer, hot water is not needed, so Man Bao closed the door and went to wash up. When she changed her clothes and put away her things, Feng Zonping and the others had already eaten breakfast and were ready to leave the palace. Bai Erlang was anxious. My classmates and I have made an appointment to go to Huguo Temple to swim in the lake. You are too slow. Man Bao said, I stayed up late last night reading a book. Staying up all night to read again, you are an official now, why do you work so hard? Bai Erlang felt that if he became an official, he would definitely not read one more book. Isn't he studying hard every day so that he can stop reading and studying when he becomes an official in the future? Asking for a monthly pass, I don't think that adding a monthly pass will make people bald, really.